Heart diseases are the most common cause of death in Iceland, as in most other Western societies. As a heart surgeon and a professor of surgery, probably many of you think that I'm going to talk about the human heart and its diseases. Today, however, I'm going to talk about another beating passion of mine, which is the conservation of the Icelandic Highlands. The true heart of the country, a jewel that we have to protect for future generations. And why is this important? Unspoiled wilderness areas still comprise 40% of our country, and they include 4 of our largest glaciers. But these areas are under serious threat due to short-sighted projects. I will come back to these threats later in my talk, but first of all, I want to explain for you the value of these areas and why we should protect them. There are few countries in the world that can proudly say that they have this diverse geology and these extreme landscapes as we have in our beautiful country. And the wildernesses are the jewel of the crown. We have barren oases, glaciers, rivers, sensitive vegetation, all of this in some of these areas. And this is displayed in unbelievable colors. And it's perhaps the fierce interface between fire and ice that is most interesting and is still ongoing and visible that makes them so special. And this is perhaps best seen in Kverkfjöll, my favorite area in Iceland. My number one hobby is outdoor activities, hiking, and especially backcountry skiing. And I can tell you there is no place better than the Icelandic unspoiled highlands to enjoy these activities. The Icelandic wildernesses are among the largest in Europe, and the fact that no humans have settled there just adds to their value. They are unique. So we Icelanders, we have huge responsibility to protect this area, not just for us, but also for the future generations. Nature conservation should be one of our top priorities. And I actually think that this is going to be a main issue for us as a nation in the coming years, how to protect our nature. And this is not just for us, the 330,000 Icelanders. This is of global interest. Our nature is so special that we have responsibilities for the rest of the world to preserve them. Why does a middle-aged doctor in Reykjavik concern so much about areas that are far away in the middle of Iceland? Why are the Highlands so special for me? I think it's because I was literally brought up in the Highlands. My brother and I, we were traveling with my parents to these interesting areas from young age, my father being a geologist. And they explained to us this fantastic world. And most importantly, we learned how to respect the nature. And this is something I truly value from my upbringing, something that I have tried to bring on to my own children. And later on in life, when I was a medical student, in 6 summers, I worked as a mountain guide with foreign tourists, specializing in the Highlands. So the Icelandic Highlands mean a lot to me. They have a very special place in my heart. And in order to promote these areas, I've been, for over 30 years, organizing trips to the Highlands with colleagues, with friends, and others, and this has given me a lot. Actually, I think the Highlands of Iceland have shaped my personality and made it clearer for me, or more clear for me, what is important in life and what is not. But the problem is that so few Icelanders have been in this area. And it's difficult to know your treasures if you haven't been there, and even more difficult to decide if you should preserve them or not. And this is something we have to work on, and we have to work on it now. This is actually not, as I said, just about us. Because if you ask people that come to Iceland, why did you visit Iceland? Over 80% of them mention the nature in the first seat as a reason for them coming to Iceland. So what are the threats for the Icelandic Highlands? Is it a real threat, or is it just a false alarm, like we see in the hospital, a benign extra heartbeat? Unfortunately, this is a real concern. For the last 70 years, our wilderness areas in Iceland have been reduced in area by 70%. And this is actually best seen on the top of Skrauti in Vonarskarð when you look south, and you see water reservoirs from Hálsgöngulón. And very close to this in southwest is Kvíslarveitilón water reservoir, also for a hydropower station. That is even more closer to Þjórsárver wilderness area. And sadly, there are even plans in this area to build geothermal power station. There are other threats to our nature, such as mass tourism, especially in south of Iceland, and increased off-road driving. Here you see a picture from Jökulgil on the Torfajökull wilderness area. This is regarded by many as one of the most beautiful spots in Iceland, if not the most beautiful one. And I think the picture explains itself. This is actually taken on my first tour there with a group, and I remember when we came there that we were speechless. We were so astonished by the beauty of the surroundings. It takes about 3 hours to walk in from Landmannalaugar, but there are no construction seen. No roads, no cars, it's totally quiet. And this is so important to experience such a crown of the Icelandic nature. But in this area, there were plans to actually build a geothermal power station several decades ago. Fortunately, those plans did not come through, because then we would not have enjoyed these spots in the area, like you see here on the picture, the green ridge, Grænirhryggur, and I call the next one, the yellow one, the cinnamon ridge, and the licorice boot. And people ask me about both these photos taken by a good friend of mine. Are they photoshopped? And they are not. This is just the unbelievable colors of nature in these Liberate Mountains. And I tell you, there are no other places like this in the world. Close to these treasures, actually, that were protected as a natural reserve area in 1979, you can see these electricity cables along River Tungná, close to the gate of the area in Landmannalaugar. In my mind, this was a huge mistake to position them there, and that is something we have difficulties to do something about today. But we should learn from our mistake and not repeat them. And I tell you, these cables so close to this area are not helping us to put this area on the UNESCO heritage list as we want. For decades, the Icelandic economy has been based on fisheries and on aluminum export. And the aluminum explains why Iceland is the largest energy producer per capita in the world. This due to our huge energy resources in the form of geothermal and hydroelectric power. 70% of this energy is used to drive aluminum smelters and ferrosilicon smelters. And remember, this is not without costs. It is expensive to produce electricity, and more importantly, requires constructions that are like scars in our nature and especially the wilderness areas. They fragment them. And this fragmentation of our wilderness areas is not in line with sustainable tourism in unspoiled nature. And this is, of course, very important today because last year, tourism in Iceland bypassed or surpassed both aluminum export and fisheries as the most important sector in our economy. This year, 2016, we expect up to 1.6 million tourists to Iceland, compared to 400,000 10 years ago in year 2006. Tourism is expected to increase by 30% per year at the moment. And this is happening much too fast, especially for the Highlands, because we have not built up infrastructure to receive all these guests in the area. So, our most important next step is to protect these areas by establishing a national park in the Highlands. And this is actually supported majority of voters in Iceland. Multiple polls have shown that. And importantly, voters from all political parties. And we should do it now and not in 5 or 10 years. We don't have time for that. Time is running out. But we have to remember that our experience with nature reserve areas and with national parks is very good in Iceland. We even have already plans to put the Vatnajökull National Park on the UNESCO heritage list. And name me the Icelander who is not in favor of the decision taken in 1975 to protect Hornstrandir in the Westfjord as a nature reserve area. And our government, our politicians, have to have some guts to take the decisions that were taken in the 70s and 80s in Iceland. And this is missing in Iceland today. We also have to improve our infrastructure in the Highlands. We have to build more hiking trails. We have to build toilets to receive all this flood of tourists. I also strongly believe in education. I think it's very important for us to educate the general public about these areas and their value. We should go to schools and educate our children about the anatomy of our nature, the value, how to respect it, and also their parents. But my experience is that the best way of nature protection is to bring people to these areas, to let them experience the heart beating on site. There are some other ways to do this. But importantly, we have to promote our young generation to like and come to these areas. We should take families to places like Þjórsárver. Actually, very few Icelanders have been in Þjórsárver. And this is a unique place in the world. It's astonishing. You come there, there's a lot of sensitive vegetation in a black oasis, rivers, small lakes, and this is framed in by mountains and glaciers. And sometimes there are thousands of geese in the area. And this is actually not least important for our psychological well-being to be in a place like this. And I have been so fortunate in my life to bring thousands of people to the Highlands of Iceland. And I've not met a single visitor that hasn't been impressed about being there. Even on days when the weather is not beautiful and our views are limited. I'm an optimist by nature, like I'm here when I stand on Tungnafellsjökull and I'm looking over Vonarskarð, the most beautiful word in Icelandic, the pass of hope. But the solid facts I have presented to you here today, they make me worried and concerned. Our government has to change its policy, and we have to act for protecting the nature. This is extremely important. We do not need more water dams, electricity lines, reservoirs, high-speed roads, or electricity cables in our highlands. We have to say stop. We have to realize that the nature in the highlands is much more worth unspoiled than it is by scars and constructions from demanding industry. We have a saying in Icelandic, betra, heilt and gróið. Unspoiled is better than well-healed. This is so very true for the human heart, but it's also very true for the Icelandic Highlands.